What's up, everybody? Welcome on into this edition of Warchant TV. I'm Aslan Hajavani, joined by managing editor of Warchant.com, the ultimate Seminole sports source, Ira Schoffel. Hit that like button. Ira's here. You all like that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And heck, maybe even go to Warchant.com and use that promo code on the bottom of your screen for 30 free days of access to the website. All right, Ira, we're getting closer to a decision, and hopefully one that involves college football. I know a question that's been on most everybody's mind, at least Florida State-wise, not only will there be a football season, but kind of what's his coaching staff been up to since we last heard from them in March? You kind of decided that's a pretty good question. I'm going to try to figure it out. What have you been up to here the last few months in talking to the staff?
I guess in early April, maybe at the end of March, early April, I reached out to FSU and asked if I could, when it was clear that this was not going to be a quick fix, that this wasn't going to be a situation where FSU's players and all college football players, they get basically, I think it was March 12th when everything shut down. It was clear that people weren't going to be coming back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I reached out to FSU and I pitched the idea of trying to chronicle how FSU was going to handle this situation, how Mike Norvell was going to handle this situation, because I think it's unique. I mean, obviously it's unique for everybody, but I thought this situation was particularly unique at Florida State because you have a guy who's, in Mike Norvell, is his first year as a Power 5 head coach after a tremendously successful 4 years at Memphis. But you also have a program that's so prestigious like Florida State, but that's coming off of three, mediocre seasons to maybe below average seasons. And then you have, so the expectations that go along with that, you have a roster filled with players who now have gone through three different head coaches in the span of 4 years. I just think this was a really unique situation. And then to have this happen, a pandemic that forces the entire team to basically leave campus, go back home for 3 months. And, and at the time we didn't know how long it was going to last, but it was clear it was going to last at least a couple months. And so during that time, thanks to Mike Norvell and his staff and, the people at FSU, I was able to basically talk to them throughout the process. So I was able to conduct interviews with Coach Norvell and Bruce Warwick, the chief of staff, and basically everybody on the staff and assistant coaches, and try to figure out how they were going to handle this situation and chronicle that. And then as people are seeing this, we've released the first part of this series, and we'll be releasing several more parts over the next week.
I mean, I guess, the answer is one bite at a time, but like, how do you eat an 800-pound elephant? I mean, when you have all this access and all these sort of events and news and information keeps changing every single day. I mean, just what was it like, and how did you decide to kind of break down this entire process into a series that people could kind of, digest?
I think, some real key storylines kind of emerged during the process. One of them really to me was Mike Norvell. I think the story in the series that's really going to resonate with people, I think, is how Coach Norvell handled this whole situation. I came away really impressed because we talk so much about coaches these days as they're so professional. They're CEOs and they're like executives, and they've got these detailed plans, and they're so demanding, and and that's what makes them so successful. The Nick Sabans, even Jimbo Fisher, and coaches around the country who have obviously Urban Meyer, taskmasters and guys who are so driven but also detail oriented and focused, and that's kind of one of the keys to their success. But this is such a unique situation because they can't just stick to what they know. They can't just follow these procedures and trust the process. The process was changing constantly. The rules from the NCAA about when they could meet and how they had to meet were changing constantly. The technology was changing. What formats they were going to try to meet on, and how to reach the players. And I mean, it was just constantly changing. So I think, and what came through to me, and people will read about it in the later part, is that what really impressed people throughout the program, even people who were on the staff before this staff came in, these aren't not like necessarily Coach Norvell people, but people who've been in the program for years or came from other places. They've been impressed by, he is driven, he is focused, but he also has some understanding and adaptability. And I think that was really important during this process. When things would change, when circumstances would change, Mike Norvell was very quick to adapt to it. And whenever they had a morsel of information, for example, when they realized pretty early on that the first day that they would be able to have voluntary workouts would be June 1st. This was back in early May, I believe. As soon as they got that date, they didn't know workouts were going to be cleared to return on voluntary workouts would start on June 1st, but there was a chance. That was probably the earliest date that it could happen. I mean, Coach Norvell put in a plan to have everything geared towards that date. That's why FSU was doing COVID testing underneath the stadium in mid-May, way before any other schools were, because he wanted the players here. They wanted to have them quarantined, have them go through testing, so that when June 1st hit, if that was when it was cleared, they would be ready to go. And sure enough, Florida State was one of the few teams in the country that was able to have voluntary workouts on June 1st. Everything wasn't seamless. There were different things went wrong along the way, but again, I think that the picture of him emerging, his leadership skills, I think, really come through. And then some other storylines are obvious, like recruiting. How did they handle recruiting during all this? I really think that this is you couldn't have scripted a more difficult situation for a first year coaching staff than to come in, uh, put a class together real quickly, which they did for 2020, and then as soon as recruiting kind of opens up, have everything shut down for the rest of the summer. They don't even know if they're going to have official visits this fall. So, but they still have to have a recruiting class for a first year coaching staff. It's an incredible challenge. So we kind of look into that, how they've handled it, what they've done virtually, and some of the other things they've done to kind of some creative methods to try to reach recruits and uh, win some of those battles, even though they're certainly behind the eight ball. So a lot of the stories just kind of bubbled up after just kind of watching what was happening and talking to everybody involved.
The entire world, and at least for sports, kind of came to a screeching halt after that third practice in the spring. However, I mean, the staff had been around for at least 2 months, kind of in close contact with these players. They had the tour of duty, offseason conditioning stuff, and they had tried to start installing some stuff for the spring practice. So, I mean, for all the gains that I guess they kind of might have made up until that date in March, I mean, how much was given to the players, and how much do they think they ultimately kind of lost by not having the time that they were hoping they'd be able to have?
Yeah, and that's something that I think is really probably the focal point of this first part of the series, the package, is what happened, what they lost in that time, and what they've done to try to make it up. And I think if you look at from talking to the coaches and the staff, the biggest thing they lost, I think the number one thing, if you had to pick one thing that they really feel like they lost from not having those spring practices, was really figuring out the players' individual skills and talents and personalities, and not just who, not just what they liked about them as people, but where they fit best. Their plan in the spring was to work a lot of guys at different positions, really try to see how they fit into their system, how maybe they need to mold their system to the players. I mean, that's kind of one of the tenets of Mike Norvell's philosophy, is to kind of build his offense around the playmakers, not just put them in the holes that are already predetermined. And then they lost that opportunity. So really, one of the big things they're going to have to do in preseason camp, and basically that's what Norvell has challenged the coaches to do, is we were supposed to do all of that evaluation of players and individual skills in the spring, and then have the plan set for the preseason. Now they've got to figure that out in these informal, or excuse me, the workouts they just started this week, and then the enhanced workouts that they're going to start doing in about a week, where they can start doing walkthroughs, and then by the start of preseason camp, and then quickly adjust any plans they need to make based on that. They're working on assumptions right now because they didn't get that spring. The one positive to it, there are a few positives to or things that they're claiming to be positives that they're trying to hang on to from the time away. One big positive was they had much more access to the players during the summer than they normally would. Normally, when there are voluntary periods during the summer, but they actually, because the NCAA did kind of make up for them not having spring, during the summer, they had 8 hours a week where they could have meetings, position meetings. They feel like they really, from a mental standpoint, the team is in a great shape. One thing, Chris Thompson, the tight ends coach, one thing he explained to me was that in spring practice, usually if he's meeting with his position group and installing something before a practice, it's a rush. He's just trying to get them the information. They got to get out the door, get on the field, and try to apply it. because these things were slower during the summer, and then the players could voluntarily call the coaches and have Zoom meetings, they could really get into concepts deeper. And so not just teach the tight end about his role, but really teach him how it works in concert with the other positions. And they feel like from a mental standpoint, the players might actually have a better feeling about a lot of the schemes and concepts because of this, the way they had to do things. The downside though is then you got to apply it to the field. And it was one of the quotes that I'll be using from Coach Norvell was, to paraphrase him, he basically said, it's one thing to sit in an air conditioning room at 70 degrees and spit out answers. It's another thing to go out in the field when you've got a grown man lined up across from you and you actually have to make those decisions in real time with physical consequences. It could be a little bit different. So some of it's going to be a work in progress, but I think they feel like there were some positives in terms of the mental approach.
Ira, we're doing this virtually, I guess you could say. Zooming has been part of pretty much everyone's life, it seems like, here in the last 4 months or so. But it's hard to believe all the way back in March, a lot of us were like, what is Zoom? And now it's so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
But how has this staff been able to, I guess, I mean, you talk about the fact they were able to have pretty good classroom instruction, but I mean, just did anything sort of become illuminated for you when you were able to talk to Mike Norvell and see how they were able to utilize it, not only with, I guess, the players, but the entire program?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when they first started this, it feels like we've been doing Zoom forever,
Yeah.
but like us, they were the same way. I mean, the coaches had never used it before. There's funny stories about time where they couldn't, staff members couldn't figure out how to use the passwords and how to get in, and there were a lot of issues like that. But once they got through those, I mean, I think like most of us, you got through those pretty quickly. Then it became a matter of kind of trying to find the best practices. And I think, a lot of the coaches took different approaches with their individual position meetings. But basically, what you had was you would have like Adam Fuller, the defensive coordinator, would be in his house in Tallahassee, and he'd set up like a little workroom to kind of do presentations to the players. And and he's having to be his own AV staff. I mean, he can't bring in. Usually, if they were at Doak Campbell Stadium, they would have GAs or student assistants in there, kind of doing stuff for him, setting everything up, projectors and projection screens. He kind of has to do it all himself. And he said it was a lot of trial by error. Like one day they would try to teach one way, maybe on a PowerPoint, and then realize the kids were having a hard time with it. He says that he felt the most productive meetings they had were when they expanded the meeting room a little bit and got more people in there. He felt like when it was only like, because originally I think they split up the corners and the safeties. So he might have taken the safeties and Marcus Woodson took the corners. And then you only have maybe 6, 7, 8 guys in a meeting. He felt like when they expanded the room a little bit and got more people involved and participating, the meetings going better. But they did a lot of fun stuff. I mean, some of it people may have seen on social media. They did like a Jeopardy contest where a couple of the coaches actually dressed up like Alex Trebek. They put on suits. And they actually did a game show where they had the running backs compete against the receivers and in the offensive line. Then they had a defensive version as well. So they tried to do some things like that to try to mix it up. And what's interesting, talking to them, and this isn't a scientific poll. This is mostly them talking to other coaches in the country. It sounds like Florida State was on the high end of activity in terms of how often they met with the players, how often they, you know, how they try to maximize their time. From it sounds like some other staffs maybe met with their players once a week. I mean, Florida State was very engaged, and part of it was probably in terms of necessity. As you said, they felt like they built all these relationships, and in the end of December, January, and February, they felt like things were going tremendously well, and then everything stops in mid-March, and they have to say goodbye to everybody. And really, for over 3 months, they really weren't even seeing these guys. And so I think there was a real feeling of a sense of urgency on this staff to make sure they had constant contact with players, constant contact with each other, because those relationships weren't as deep as they might have been if this was year 4 or year 5 of their regime.
I mean, you kind of touched upon it there a little bit, but it's good to hear that Mike Norvell and the staff kind of made the best out of this really bad situation in terms of not being able to be around their players as much and have 15 full spring practices. But I don't care what coaching staffs are going to say on the record. There's got to be a couple in the Power Five that are absolutely flustered and flummoxed and have thrown their hands up in the air at various points in the last 3 months about what are we doing? I can't be a coach doing things the way I want to do it. Being around these guys and interviewing them so many different times. I mean, how do you feel they ultimately adapted just to the uncertainty and the craziness of all this? Because ultimately, yeah, I mean, you got to control what you can control. But I mean, this is just so frustrating. I can't imagine how difficult it is to be this far out of your comfort zone and try to do such important tasks when it comes to building your program.
No, I definitely think there were frustrating moments. And I think that one thing the one thing that kind of came through to me with Coach Norvell and talking to him, but then also talking to other people about him, and it'll come through in that story that's specifically about his leadership style, is that he clearly is. It's almost like an unrelenting force of positivity, and that mindset of what you just said, control what you can control, and focus, on solving, creating solutions, not worrying about problems. I mean, he's unrelenting about that. And so anything you bring up, like, I interviewed him a few days after the whole Marvin Wilson situation, with the protests, and Marvin Wilson called him out, and they had to have the team meeting and all that. And I talked to Coach Norvell a couple days later, and he turns that into a positive. I mean, he is unrelenting that everything is a positive. It's an opportunity, and I think that rubs off on the staff. So he's not the kind of boss that anybody on the staff can, like Adam Fuller said one time when he was doing a Zoom meeting at home with the staff. He was meeting with the players. He said it was just awful. He said, as a teacher, you can tell if the class just isn't getting it, and if this didn't work. And he said he like turned it off, and he was frustrated, and like, that was awful. That was just, I'm never doing that again. But you can't go to Mike Norvell with that and be like, oh, coach, it was an awful day. Like, they have to figure out solutions. I mean, it's because that's just how he is. And I'm not trying to glorify him. I'm just saying that is the culture. And so everybody you talk to, like Jeff Cupper, who came with him from Memphis, who was his operations guy there, and is kind of the number 2 now here at Florida State under Bruce Warwick. I mean, he's the same way. I mean, he'll sit there. If you talk to him, he'll explain to you why all of these things are positives. For example, you know, it's probably wishful thinking, but he believes that the players getting sent home for a couple months might have been a real positive when you think of all the things that this team has been through over the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of, especially the older guys, were recruited by Jimbo Fisher. Then he leaves. Then you bring in Willie Taggart. They don't get the results they expect to have. They have all the drama late last season. They have a bowl game. They lose the bowl game. They go straight into workouts. They go straight into offseason conditioning, the tour of duty. They go into spring practice. And, in his mind, and the way he's selling it to the players, is the player development guy, is, this is a positive. This time off is going to help you kind of calibrate and get out of that mouse wheel you've been in, for the last 3 or 4 years, and really come back with a renewed purpose, really understanding why you are here. So that's just kind of what they do. There have been frustrating moments, to your point, no question, but I really don't think Mike Norvell's not the kind of guy you can sit down at the staff meeting on Monday morning and be like, "Hey, coach, we had this problem, this problem, this problem." I just don't think he's hearing that.
All right. Well, I guess the last question kind of for me, Ira, I think is maybe one that's on the mind of a lot of folks. And if they're watching this on Wednesday, we're going to be having a recruiting chat with Michael Langston at 7 p.m. live on YouTube. But just the recruiting aspect. I mean, you set the table up well earlier on in this sort of discussion here, but you could not think of a worse situation for this coaching staff, because they did get ahead of things. There were so many high school coaches and prospects out there in those first 3 practices of the spring. I mean, they were really making some inroads and had a plan, it seemed like, to get these kids on campus, whether it was officially or unofficially. Well, that's all wiped out. We have no idea what's going to happen in the fall when it comes to official visitors. And say what you will about the caliber of recruits they're getting right now, or they're going after, but they desperately need to play a football season to show everybody, what they can do, and put some proof positive in front of these recruits. But before that happens, I mean, what have they been able to do to kind of stay afloat? And, guys like Lou Altmaier, and has been a really good sort of bell cow for them. They've added defensive backs. They've gone to Texas and picked out some big recruits. What have they been able to do recruiting wise to try to build momentum, or keep momentum, or just stay alive, I guess?
Yeah, that's probably the one area. If you were going to say there's one area that you could kind of get them to acknowledge that, it's going to be hard to find a positive from this situation. It would be in recruiting. And that's not to say that they don't think they're going to have a good class for 2021, or that they feel like they're going to accept having a less than high quality recruiting class. But they acknowledge it's a huge problem. I mean, they feel like one of the biggest selling points they have, the two big selling points they have, since they haven't coached a game yet at Florida State, are number one is the campus. Especially because a lot of these new staff members, this is their first time coaching at Florida State. A lot of them, this is their first time being at Florida State. You talk about a Kenny Dillingham or Marcus Woodson or some of these guys, and they're like, when you bring recruits on, when they brought recruits on campus in January and February for junior days, and then also those first few practices in the spring, they said you can actually feel it from the players, like the recruits. Like, it's one thing to send them pictures of campus or send them videos. They did those virtual tours, but to actually walk on campus, walk up to Doak Campbell Stadium, see the Coach Bowden statue, see the stained glass, walk inside, walk out onto the field, and see this 80,000 seat stadium, it's just something they can't replicate. So that's been a huge problem. Not getting those guys on campus has really hurt them, especially as a first year staff. The other thing that I feel like they're concerned about, the other two big concerns for them is the evaluation process on both sides. One was for the recruits. They feel like the recruits need to be on campus to really, they want the recruits to see them coach. Like, they feel like that's one of their best selling points, is when the recruits come on campus and see them coach either in a camp or in practice, and actually see how these guys coach on the field, that's a big selling point for them. Well, they lost that. On the flip side of that, they lost the ability to evaluate these players. And it's not just, can they run fast or can they jump high in a camp? They really wanted to, there's a lot of intangibles that they like to see during the evaluation process. Part of it is going on campuses, going on high school campuses in May and evaluating players that way. But also when they bring kids for visits, or when they come to their camp, does a kid quit in a drill? Does a kid take coaching? If he's going through a drill at camp and you teach him something, and then you teach him a different thing, can he apply what you taught him earlier? All those things, they're evaluating these players. It's not just about how tall they are and how fast they run, but all these other aspects to it, competitiveness and intelligence and those types of things, that now nobody's going to come out and admit this, but you get the impression they're going to have to kind of make some educated guesses with recruits. They'd like to have more information. They'd like to be able to do better evaluation, and it's just not possible. There's only so much you could do in that part. As far as building connections, I mean, the Zooms are great. One thing they did that was really interesting, and I write about in the first part here, is they were able to do some things with Zoom that you couldn't do normally. Like, normally, if kids come on unofficial visits in the spring, a lot of times they can't come with their family. So you might have a recruit come up with like 4 of his buddies from Tampa, or 3 of his friends from Miami, or their high school coach will bring up a van full of kids. Well, the parents don't get to come on those trips. This time with Zoom and with the rules, the way they've changed them, they were actually able to hold meetings with full families. So like a whole family of a recruit could be sitting in their living room Zooming with the whole coaching staff, and they could bring in the academic support staff on the Zoom and the strength coaches, and answer everybody's questions and discuss everything. That's something that you didn't get in the normal way. So there are some things they're going to try to take going forward and try to integrate those into the process before, because that's something that they never thought about doing before. But it's a way to kind of embrace the entire family, educate the entire family on the school, and add that to the puzzle. So they found some ways to do it, but I think to some degree, this 2021 class, no matter how it turns out in terms of star ratings or rankings, there's going to be some educated guesses they had to make because they couldn't evaluate as much as they'd like to.
Well, man, this sounds like an extremely in-depth feature. I can't wait to dive into it. It's going to be a multi-part feature from Ira, who's been on the beat since 2002. He's our managing editor. You won't be able to find it anywhere else besides warchant.com. So if you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Use the promo code WARCHANT30 for 30 free days of access to the website.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to rolling these out over the next week. And again, thanks to FSU, to their staff and the coaching staff and Coach Norvell and the sports information staff for making this possible, and for them sharing their time and giving us this inside look, because I think this is unprecedented, really, in college football history. And I really appreciate them opening their doors a little bit to give people an idea of how they handled this situation. Because again, I mean, it's something we've never seen before, and hopefully maybe we'll never see again.
Managing editor of Warchant.com, Ira Schoffel, joining us here on Warchant TV. Thanks for your time, man. Can't wait to dive into this.
Thanks, man.